Words, but a horse guy.
You need to leave. It's disgusting.
Adult animation has come a long way in the last 10 years. Instead of 100 Family Guy clones and a few original ideas that are lucky to last 2 seasons, we now have 100 Family Guy clones, a dozen Rick and Morty clones, Big Mouth, and a few original ideas that are lucky to last 2 seasons. I guess it hasn't changed that much. Of course, I'm being hyperbolic, but this is the gist of conversations you'd find online. So many people have become jaded to how many projects in the realm of adult animation are just comedies with an unappealing art style that seem as if they don't do anything new. At times, it feels like we're a far cry away from the late 90s and early 2000s, where adult animation felt as if it was not only thriving, but was only just beginning. A lot of these programs had a variety of art styles, genres, and approaches to storytelling. Even the animated sitcoms, which were in abundance even back then, managed to stand out from one another. Mission Hill, Clone High, Duckman, The Oblongs, King of the Hill, Moral Oral, just to name a few. These were all adult comedies, but they provided wildly different experiences from one another. Mission Hill, for example, focused on 2 brothers going through their coming-of-age stories at 2 different stages of their lives, depicted through the advantage of the animated medium. Incredible color palettes, healthy doses of slapstick, and visual gags, like bubbles blowing out of a character's head when they're drunk, that accentuated their body language, all while maintaining a low-key, comfy vibe that you don't see much of today. Compare that to The Oblongs, which focused on social stratification through the lens of a disabled family, constantly beat down by the world around them. Of course, it had its fair share of crude humor and other adult animation staples that are still around today, but it had something unique to say through the characters and setting that you wouldn't find anywhere else. Also, Will Ferrell voiced the dad in the show. Wow.
In this house, I am the Pope, the King, and the Sheriff. Help! He's gonna bury me again!
And we weren't just restricted to comedies. Aeon Flux and MTV Spider-Man, for example, an experimental science fiction series and an edgier yet hip with the kids interpretation of a beloved superhero character, both unique for their time. We even had a nice blend of genres with shows like The Venture Brothers, an action-adventure comedy. So what happened? How did we go from all of this to, well... First off, it's important to recognize that for as great as all of these 90s and 2000s adult animated series were, a lot of them really weren't that successful when they premiered. Most of them died out after 1 season, and the entirety of those seasons didn't even air on the stations they initially premiered on, instead getting rescued a few years down the road by Adult Swim, exposing these titles to viewers who missed out the first time around, lending to the cult status so many of them have. You don't know what you got until it's gone, I'm afraid. The age of the Family Guy clones that largely brought us to where we are today only happened because Family Guy was one of the few lucky ones that really took off and became a prominent face of the medium. I mean, now that it's off Adult Swim, viewership for the channel is abysmal. It's kinda rough to see. Speaking of which, where is adult animation at now? In all honesty, if you ask me, it's kind of having a second wind. It feels like there's been a never-ending rollout of adult animated series over the past few years, and there's only going to be more on the way thanks to all the difficulties that arose with filming live-action entertainment in a pandemic. And while this could be viewed as a good thing, a majority of animation fans on the internet has construed this, or more so, the projects themselves, as a bad thing. And it's not hard to grasp why. Of course, the biggest complaint is how most of these shows look like poo-poo on purpose. I already did a whole essay on my feelings towards the rise of uniform art styles in both children and adult animation, with a sequel I still haven't made, oops. But I want to share a little bit of a Twitter thread by Aaron Long, director on shows such as BoJack Horseman and Tuca and Birdie, alongside being creator of the web series Sub-Lo and Tangy Mustard. Please watch Sub-Lo, it's so good, all the episodes are on YouTube for free. Can you imagine thinking this kind of shit is the only way to tell a joke without the visuals getting in the way of the writing? Congratulations, you are now ready to showrun 75% of adult animation. This is not related to anything in my current job. I was just thinking about some job interviews I had in the last few months for in-development shows, where they specifically said they wanted this kind of thing. In job interviews for new shows, I heard a lot of variations on, "We don't want the visuals to be a part of the joke. We just want a bland, deadpan look so people can laugh at our one-liners without being confused by funny designs or acting." But they don't say it that clearly. Most adult animation is absolutely in the same boat most kids' animation is in. While every show has its own design philosophies and quirks that make them stand as their own art style, they still come across as near identical because that's what the higher-ups want. And to the consumer, who's going to judge things off the surface level, that's not all too appealing. Thin lines and round eyes are all someone who's scrolling a streaming service needs to see to decide that they probably don't want to waste their time with it. Or, given the evident success, They go, hey, that kind of looks like Family Guy. I like Family Guy, throw that shit on. Building off that, I can't blame the animation fans who've grown cynical or apathetic towards the state of adult animation. Streaming services are deemed to be the future of entertainment, yet on the adult animation front, we're given an abundance of shows like Hoops, Chicago Party Ant, and The Prince. These shows don't really try to do anything new. The jokes miss way more than they hit. And due to the binge-watching model that I think really should go, the characters and stories don't really stick around in your memory. And of course, shows like Big Mouth and Paradise PD seem to just be trucking on. And while I understand they have their fans, I can't stomach either of these series for longer than a few minutes. And yes, odds are we are going to get dozens more of these subpar, largely forgettable series over the next few years, especially as the streaming wars ramp up. It's a downer to think about because, for a second there, it seemed like streaming would embrace innovation and try something new with shows like BoJack, Love, Death, and Robots, and The Midnight Gospel. But not only do they feel few and far between, they're getting eclipsed by the same old, same old. The only difference now is that a lot of these animated comedies have half-baked continuity to give off the illusion of serialization for the binge-watching format. But most of the time, nothing interesting happens. There's no satisfying payoff. If you want a vehicle just to tell jokes, don't try to shoe in a story. But do I think adult animation is on a downward spiral? Well, no, far from it. For as stagnant as adult animation may feel at times, there are a lot of projects that are simply overlooked or quickly forgotten due to the rapid-fire nature of entertainment that streaming has cultivated. Close Enough, Primal, Invincible, Harley Quinn, Solar Opposites, Tuca and Birdie. These are just a few off the top of my head that are doing something relatively new or refreshing for adult animation in just about every department. They're combating what adult animation has been reduced to for so long without having to compromise. These shows know how to reel in the average Joe through the tropes of adult animation and Trojan horse in a voice of their own. All of these shows have their flaws, sure, except Primal. Everything about that show needs to be framed in an art gallery, but they're all a step in the right direction. And as much as we shouldn't praise the near monopoly that is Disney, they're doing their part with series such as Marvel's What If and Star Wars Visions, adult animated series by all accounts, that are viewed by millions on a weekly basis, using their massive IPs to have adults warm up to the medium and recognize them as something beyond childish entertainment. Of course, there are fans of these IPs that'll scoff at these projects because they're animated anyways, but that's where word of mouth is a huge advantage. The dude you know who watched Endgame 3 times in theaters may look at Captain Carter and roll his eyes, but once he hears that the Watcher and Infinity Stone-powered Ultron have a Dragon Ball Z brawl throughout the multiverse, I imagine he'll change his tune. Lest we forget, there's also some well-welcomed revivals, spin-offs, and adaptations on the horizon that'll continue to rope in viewers into the wonderful world of animation. Clone High, which is seeming to be a direct continuation. Critical Role, something that is sure to please D&D lovers everywhere. The Boondocks 2022, Beavis and Butthead. I'm game for all of these, and excited to throw them on my TV as soon as they come out. Not to mention, I'm a huge believer in not judging a book by its cover. An adult animated series may look unappealing, only existing to fill up a catalog, but if you give it a shot, you may actually be surprised. F is for Family was disregarded as a Family Guy knockoff when it premiered, but that couldn't be further from the truth. If anything, you're better off comparing it to King of the Hill, but even those two shows are nothing alike when you really get into it. I never expected to be emotionally moved by its story and characters like I have been every season. The new HBO Max series 10-Year-Old Tom objectively looks terrible on a visual merit, but aside from that clearly coming across as intentional, the show is hilarious. And I've been having a blast watching it. Feels like a modern home movies with its delivery, snappy dialogue, and grounded scenarios with absurd escalations. Recently, an Amazon Prime series, Fairfax, had a first look that was met with unanimous backlash due to the art style and a premise focusing on hypebeast culture. But does it really look like the average adult animated series? Because honestly, this is a style I haven't seen in years. It's kind of a throwback to some of the series on Fox's old ADHD block. The color palettes look absolutely gorgeous. And instead of ugly or even cartoony, the characters just look kinda human. The writing will be its true testament. While the show may date itself, hypebeast culture has been around for years and won't die out anytime soon. So I think this show could honestly have some pretty good social commentary that may age well a few years down the road.
Nobody dabs anymore, Jesus.
But the internet should lighten up. This already isn't on the same level as something like Hoops. If it sucks, it sucks. but it deserves a chance without all the pessimism. We're also receiving a lot more creator-driven projects that are arguably a huge gamble in the eyes of executives, given the green light because of their success online. Smiling Friends and Hazbin Hotel aren't exactly the norm when it comes to adult animation, yet they both have full seasons on the way. On that note, indie animation is also thriving, better than ever. Hazbin's sister show, Hell of a Boss, is arguably the biggest cartoon around right now, averaging over 10 million views per episode. That outweighs cable premieres and I imagine most streaming numbers by a huge margin. And there's other web series like Meat Canyon's Monster Lab, which averages over 1 million views per episode. These projects are crucial, as they're easily accessible, provide work for artists, and serve as direct proof of what people are looking for. Not to mention, HBO Max seems to be putting a lot of care into adult animation. While not every project they have in development looks like a hit, I feel like most of them are a change of pace, and could really take the internet by surprise. The platform is also launching an adult animated shorts program for aspiring artists. And considering some of the most successful animated series of all time came from a shorts program on their network, I can't wait to see what comes of this. Competition breeds innovation. Studios greenlight what they see as popular, resonating with audiences, and bringing in a disgusting amount of money. And I feel like all of this factors into those notions. Yes, we're going to get some garbage along the way, but ultimately, adult animation is moving towards a state everyone's been begging years for it to be at. Original episodic comedies with heart, high-concept fantasy action series with overarching stories, gritty action adventures, breathtaking anthologies, long-awaited conclusions, and shows that do a little bit of everything. Kids animation sort of stole the crown for interesting stories in recent years, but as serialization is largely dying out over there, beyond shows on Netflix, adult animation is here to pick up the slack, firing off on all cylinders without any limitations. It's truly a new era. Of course, I could end this video on the typical like and subscribe junk you're used to, or I can beg any executive watching this to pick up my adult cartoon. Come on, please, I'm desperate!